next presenter is Hawkins Gay. He is resident physician in internal medicine at Northwestern University Feinberg School of Medicine, and he'll ultimately be pursuing cardiology fellowship positions to further his training. But his research interests include cardiovascular epidemiology, preventative medicine, and issues related to open access clinical trial data. He received his undergraduate degree in economics from University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He went on to get pre-medical education at Columbia University in New York, and then he received both a master in public health and his medical doctor degree from Emory University in Atlanta. And prior to working as a physician, he spent 2 years as an investment banking analyst with Piper Jaffray.
Thanks. So first of all, I just want to thank the organizers of the symposium for inviting me here and for being interested in the work that my collaborators and I have been doing in the shared clinical trial data space. So really, sharing clinical trial data and moving towards open access in clinical trial arenas is a very important direction for the future of medicine, and we think for the future of clinical research. And I'm here really to kind of give, I guess, a brief overview of the current landscape as it exists now, and some, more importantly, about some of the work that we've done in that landscape, working with data that's currently sort of freely accessible, and some of the challenges that we face working with the data, and sort of what we learned through that experience about ways to open it up and advance the system in beneficial ways, I think. This slide just kind of gives you an overview that there's been a lot of discussion about this recently, and a lot of very key organizations and institutions like the Institute of Medicine, and then importantly, the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors have been discussing this and some of their ideas about bringing this model forward, in addition to just opinion pieces in big journals like the JAMA and the New England Journal of Medicine. This is kind of a bird's eye view of people that are involved in this process. So we have the participants who sign up to be part of clinical trials, and they are openly sharing their biologic data and their health data, usually with the thought that that's going to be used to advance health. And then we have the clinical trialists, and these a lot of times are academic physicians or people employed by institutions, drug companies, pharmaceutical companies, to organize these clinical trials. And it's a big undertaking, and a lot of times these are multi-institution trials. They're international trials. They have thousands and thousands of patients that they have to collect data on. They have to encourage these patients to follow up. And a lot of times they last multiple years. So it's a big undertaking, and it's not an easy task. And for a long time, the data that they've curated, they've held on to very tightly, because a lot of their career advancement comes from publishing from that data. And so they've had reasons to want to keep a lot of that proprietary. And then part of this that's been growing a lot recently is the data analysts and the data scientists who are very good at asking questions, and they're very good at digging through massive data sets to answer those questions. And a lot of these analysts work and partner with the clinical trialists and are part of these trials from the very beginning. But there's also a growing number of these analysts and scientists who know that these data exist, and they're creating questions on their own and are very interested in getting access to that data to answer questions that can be very different from the reason that it was collected in the first place. And also not on here, and it can push and pull things in a different direction, is the source of funding. So whether that's coming from the NIH or public funding, or whether that's coming from pharmaceutical companies, can kind of sway things in different directions here. So a lot of the benefits for sharing clinical trial data comes from increased research efficiency and rapidly getting to new discoveries, because we have a lot of good questions out there and we have a lot of good data out there, and a lot of times there's no need to start from scratch and create a clinical trial focused specifically on one thing when we could use a lot of what's out there to answer those questions already. And then data aggregation and meta-analysis is something that I've also been part of in my career, and I've done a few meta-analyses. And for a long time, we've had access to the summary data that's presented in the published articles, and we can aggregate summary data to really say what is the overall effect size, or a lot of times studies looking into the same thing show effects in different directions, and so we aggregate all of the studies done in one topic to see what is the true direction of effect. But we're very limited in what kind of sensitivity analyses we can do or what sort of summary analyses we can do by not having the participant level data. So if we could get the patient level data, de-identified of course, these become a lot more powerful. And then what I'll talk a little bit more about today, because this is kind of what we did, just confirming results of studies that have been published is very important, and it's one of a very easy way of using the existing data. And through doing that, through confirming results, you can really enhance the public's trust in those results, and you can offset people's worry about conflicts of interest that may exist between who funded those studies and what they were looking at. A lot of times it's a pharmaceutical company funding the study that's looking at whether or not their drug is beneficial. A lot of challenges that currently exist are, of course, number one, ensuring that the participants in these trials' health information is protected and de-identified. And another thing that I'll talk a little bit about today is creating very responsible and efficient ways of sharing this data. The landscape for sharing this data is currently very, very diverse and very heterogeneous. And the ease of getting data from these different sites is, some of it's very easy and some of it you have to go through a lot of different steps. And if we're going to scale this out on a much larger platform, I think we have to have a better idea about how to do this. And I do think it's important to provide adequate credit to the investigators who are involved in collecting all of this, because they spend a lot of time. They have to want to continue doing this because it's not an easy thing to do. And if they are not getting the credit that they feel that they deserve for putting it all together, it's going to cause problems in the long run. And then something which we ran into is avoiding misinterpretation of these massive, massive data sets. Ours wasn't even a big study, as you'll see, but some of these data sets, and I've worked on a few of these projects, have many thousands of patients, and they're collecting millions of different data points on these patients. And your ability to dig through those data sets is only as good as the metadata, as the data dictionaries, the statistical analysis plans that you get, and it can be very difficult. And even with some of the better metadata that I've seen, we still often have trouble working with this freely. And so incentivizing some way of collaborating with the original researchers, I think, will be very important to ensure that you're not missing something if you're finding different results. And then a lot of people talk about preventing data dredging or avoiding, if you have lots and lots of data out there and you just dig through it and look for different associations and you don't have a specific question in mind, you're probably going to find some significant results just out of pure chance. And whether that's clinically significant is up for debate. So we did a reproduction analysis of a trial called the SMART AF trial, which I'll talk a little bit more about. And our interest in doing this came from, as we looked into a lot of the debate about open access to clinical trial data, we looked into simple reproduction analyses, and not many of these have really been done. And this is kind of one of the pillars of the scientific method, is that if you have a question and then you go through a very specific research algorithm to answer that question, you then want to be very specific about how you did that and present the data to other people to then recreate that. And if they can't do it, then there's a problem. And so this author, Ibrahim, and his colleagues published a paper in the JAMA in 2014 where they did a systematic review of the literature, including sites like PubMed and many others, starting from when those sites were created through 2014, where they looked for how many published research studies had then been reproduced by other authors. And what they found is, searching the entire databases, only 34 total studies met their inclusion and exclusion criteria, and a lot of those, once they got down into the details, ended up being secondary analyses of the original data that were actually done by the original authors or groups of the original authors, and only 5 studies were true reproduction analyses by independent authors trying to recreate the results of published literature. And a systematic review is not perfect, but there's thousands and thousands and thousands of articles that you're going through, and to get down to only 5 was very surprising to a lot of people. So again, I kind of touched on this, but we sought access to the SMART AF trial, which I'll tell you more about. We use, this last bullet point is important. It's going to be impossible to go through all of the platforms that are out there that are making some sort of clinical trial data available to the public, but some of the bigger ones and some of the more well-known ones that have been in the literature recently are the Yale Open Data Access Project, or the YODA project, which is what we ended up using. I've done another, and there was actually a big New England Journal of Medicine data analysis challenge called the Sprint Data Challenge that used the NIH BioLink website, where the NIH, on clinicaltrials.gov, we heard this morning, they're putting a lot of summary data about the registered clinical trials available, but a lot of times that's data that is presented in the articles. For a few of their trials, they're actually putting patient-level data if it was funded by the NIH, and I'm not sure what criteria they use to determine which of their funded studies they make available on the BioLink site, but you can get patient-level data on NIH BioLink. ClinicalStudyDataRequest.com is actually a partnership between the Wellcome Trust and GlaxoSmithKline originally, and now includes 13 other pharmaceutical companies that have made most of their clinical trial data available to the public. If you create a research proposal, submit that research proposal to the Wellcome Trust, and they agree with the proposal or the question that you're asking, you can then get access to it. The Immune Tolerance Network Trial Share is a National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Disease funded studies, where this is actually one of the freer portals where all you have to do is create a username and a password. You can then log into it, search their databases, and just download them for use on your personal computers. We ended up, because one of the few studies we hadn't, or one of the few sites we hadn't worked with was YODA, we chose that one. My group is interested in cardiovascular studies in particular. They have one study on their platform that's a cardiovascular trial, so we wanted to get access to that, reproduce their primary analyses and safety endpoints, and then formally characterize a lot of the challenges and opportunities that exist. This is just a screenshot of the YODA portal. You can learn a lot more about their mission, their model. You can search through all the trials that are available there, and this is actually the site where you go to request access and submit your research proposals. This is very similar to the clinicaltrialstudyrequest.com site, where it's a partnership between Yale and Johnson & Johnson, and all of Johnson & Johnson's subsidiary pharmaceutical companies and biotech companies have put a lot of their published studies data available to the public through this website, again, if you create a research proposal ahead of time, and that's mediated by a group at Yale. This is the study that we sought access to. It's a study in adults who have atrial fibrillation, and the intervention is a pulmonary vein isolation with a radiofrequency ablating catheter. And basically what that is that it's a catheter that you kind of burn a circle around where the pulmonary veins intersect with the left atrium, because that's where a lot of the electrical activity that leads to atrial fibrillation comes from, and they isolate those veins by burning a circle around it with this catheter. Their comparison group was really just historical performance of other catheters. They did not have a control group, and they looked at their primary effectiveness outcome was freedom from arrhythmia or atrial fibrillation recurrence over a 12-month period. This was a Kaplan-Meier survival analysis, and they also looked at a number of procedure and device-related safety outcomes. So we submitted our research proposal through YODA. We wanted to recreate the effectiveness, safety outcomes, and also put together a lot of the tables and figures. And when we couldn't do this, or when we were getting differing results, or couldn't find the data that we needed to recreate some of their analyses, we then reached out to the primary study authorship and the statisticians that worked on the trial or were listed on the trial. And if we had difficulty contacting them, then we chose to go back through YODA and submit some of our follow-up requests to YODA to then give to the original authorship. This is a timeline of the study and how long it took us and what the different steps were. So we were actually ready to submit our proposal in May of 2016. It took about a month for the group at Yale to read through it and send it out to other reviewers, and they eventually decided that it was something they were excited about and wanted to give us the data for. After they chose to do that, it then took another 2 months to execute the data use agreement between Northwestern, Yale, and Johnson & Johnson. And unfortunately, the original data use agreement they sent us was for a pharmaceutical study, and we ended up needing a data use agreement for a biotech for a catheter and not a drug, and we had to then execute another one that took another 2 months. So finally, by October of 2016, we were ready to get the data. They gave us access to the data over this SAS clinical trial platform, which I'll tell you about, and it took us a month to do our primary analysis. And after that, we put together a pretty detailed data request for additional data that we needed for parts of the analysis that we couldn't match, and some of the analysis that we just couldn't do because we couldn't find our way through the metadata to the points that we needed. We sent it out to the statisticians first and the study authorship and actually did not get a reply. So then we had to go through the YODA project, who were able to contact the appropriate folks, and they got back to us with answers to some of the questions, but not all of them. To be fair, we did get down to very minor differences that I don't think they were very interested in hashing out with us. But they didn't answer all of it. And then we took those answers, finished the analysis, and we finally completed it this month. So this is how we were given access to the data. It was through a virtual desktop. We couldn't download it and use it on our own computers. It was through this SAS Clinical Trial Data Transparency desktop. I don't know if anyone's worked over that. But you have to go to one website to create a username and password. You then have to go to a second website every time you want to log on to the virtual desktop and send yourself a security code. You can then log into the desktop, and you can work with the analysis there. They gave us access to 29 different data sets. There was not a data analysis ready data set. It was their raw data in 29 different data sets that we then had access to on this site, and they gave us free use of, so Northwestern has SAS, but if we didn't have it, it was available to us on this website to dig through the software. But if any analysis or any summary data that we created and then wanted to work with offline or distribute to our collaborators, you had to go to a fourth website and request the ability to download that and distribute it. So that took a while. So we're kind of getting into the primary results now. This is a lot of data. This is just the table 1, the demographic data, and you can see they had an effectiveness cohort and a safety cohort. There actually weren't a lot of differences between what we found and what they found. There were some minor differences probably between how we categorized cerebrovascular disease versus how they did. One of the primary differences was just in the effectiveness cohort and safety cohort. We were off by one participant. They had 122 participants in their effectiveness cohort. We found 124, and in their safety cohort, they had 161, and we found 162. But the actual statistical differences between the groups were minor. The primary effectiveness outcomes, the main one was a 12-month, was a Kaplan-Meier survival analysis of freedom from arrhythmia. You can see they were very similar, 76 to 74%. And that difference there is probably, you can argue that that's not very meaningful from a clinical standpoint. Once we got down into a little bit more of the granular data, the overall success rate, which was just number of people who had the ablation over the 12-month period and the number of people who were free from arrhythmia at the end of that 12-month period, you can start to see a little bit of difference between what we found and what they found. And when we dug down into the difference, it really was a number of people who just had an atrial fibrillation recurrence, and we could not find those recurrences, and that was one of the things that we asked them. We even requested their code to see how they coded for it, to see what they were using, and it was not provided. The safety events, this is actually a very safe procedure. There are very few events. So out of 164 procedures in our safety cohort and 162 in theirs, you can see there were very few adverse events. And any differences that we found were on the order of like one event. So not much difference there. So really, when it got down to us actually getting the results of this study, there were not, you can argue about how significant the differences were in the primary outcomes, and certainly very similar in the safety outcomes. But just working with the data, we learned a lot. There were some data that we felt were missing from the data sets that they provided to us. It is possible that we just couldn't locate that data because we have a difficult time working through their data dictionary, and we had 29 data sets to go through. And so that really limited how complete of a reproduction we were able to do. Working over that firewall through the SAS clinical trial transparency virtual desktop was difficult and time-consuming. And ultimately, everything taken together, it required a year to complete an analysis, which the actual analysis only took us 2 months. A month for the original one, and then another month to work with the follow-up data that they gave us. And honestly, I think a lot of the difficulty we had, even after the problems with the metadata, could have been offset by a better working relationship with the trialists, and trialists who were more interested in collaborating with us on the project. So this is actual experience working with clinical trial data, and it was accessed over a platform that currently exists. However, it is one small experience, and it was a smaller study, and there is a high chance that if we requested access to another study over the same portal even, the data set would be more complete, or the metadata would be more structured, and maybe even the authors would be more willing to collaborate with us. And we really felt like Johnson & Johnson had created this initiative, but not necessarily told everyone involved in the studies, certainly, especially when this was getting off the ground, that they would be sharing this data with other people. So I don't think the original analysts created their metadata with data sharing in mind, and that probably had a lot to do with the state of what we were given. We feel, just kind of in conclusion, that it's very important to, in some way, incentivize collaboration with original trialists and ensure that they receive some sort of credit for the work that they've done in gathering the data, and that would also give them an incentive to work more freely with people who are trying to recreate the data or look into secondary analyses. Having a standardized way of presenting and making metadata available is going to be very important. There needs to be a minimum standard that it has to meet. And then this gatekeeper versus free access model is something that I think, and it's received a lot of debate, and there's a lot of work to be done. Is the like the trial share database the best way, where you just create a username and a password and anyone who wants it can download it and do anything they want with it? Or is it better to have some sort of a gatekeeper model where you have to present a research proposal, tell them what you're going to do with the data, have a pre-existing question that you're going to try to use that data to answer, and then get some sort of access to it, preferably not over a firewall. It'd be nice to be able to sign a data use agreement and then use it freely on your own computers, or disseminate it among your collaborators more freely. And we thought including statistical code could be an important thing going forward. That was something that they really did not want to give us for some reason, even after we had shown them that we had taken a crack at doing this with our own coding, and we're just having trouble completing it all. So I want to thank my collaborators, the people that put together the YODA project, the folks at Yale who are very helpful to us, Johnson & Johnson for making the data available, and the authors and researchers who worked to create the trial. And I'd open it up for any questions that anyone has. Yeah.
Thank you. So your timeline was really interesting.
Yeah.
The number of steps you had to go through. And on your last slide, when you were talking about the difference between, a model of just free access and gatekeeping, it does seem to me that in the end, you needed to be able to have that intervention to help you get information from the original researchers to kind of answer your question. And I guess that is one issue with just free data, would be how do you get back to ask further questions of the originators? Have you thought some about what would need to be in place to prevent the need for all of that kind of trying to go back to people, or make it such that an open data is really actually reusable? Because it seems like you really had to do a lot of back and forth before you could do what you wanted with it.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, and I think it's going to require, as groups start stipulating that open data is a requirement, which I think the NIH is going to do eventually with any study that they fund. And importantly, I think groups like the New England Journal and JAMA are going to make studies that they publish. You're going to have to release that data. To make all of that data on equal grounds for people to use it with equal ease, I think it's going to be important to have some sort of a gatekeeper model where there is someone in charge of curating that data, and when you submit that data to them, they will go through it and make sure that the data itself and the metadata that comes with it meets some kind of a minimum standard. If it was completely free and you could just put it out there and they say, we've put it out there and we've met the requirement that our data is there, it could be in a form that was just totally unusable, which wouldn't be very beneficial to anyone, I don't think. So to make sure that people kind of comply with the reason we're working towards this, I think there's going to have to be some sort of gatekeeper model. What kind, I'm not sure. Yeah.
So earlier you were speaking about, we need people to share, and this is important.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of touched on this, but I wanted to loop back to kind of two parts of this. One, P&T committees don't care. P&T committees researchers are not currently being rewarded for sharing data sets.
Right.
And
that's true.
I talked to deans and they're like, yeah, no, we're never going to count data. So the incentives are not there. And I don't know if you had any thoughts on that. And then I saw a paper last week before, where somebody had done a study of, you talked about in PubMed not being able to find replication studies, reproducibility. Mm-hmm. And somebody just did a study of the journals, and it was like, the journals won't accept the reproducibility studies. So how do we deal with that? There's two major barriers. We're not rewarded for sharing our data, and the journals won't accept it when we do it.
Yeah, so I think those are very good points, and that's probably why, and that was one of the things discussed in that systematic review, that they thought that they found so few reproduction studies, is because the journal wasn't interested in that. They said, yeah, the primary study has been published, and we're looking at publishing cutting-edge stuff, and the fact that you were able to reproduce this maybe not so important. And I'll talk about that in a second. The first one is something that there have actually been a lot of pieces discussing that problem that have come out in different journals. And a lot of people think that there needs to be some sort of maybe even authorship on the reproduction paper or the secondary analysis that's given to the people who collected the data. And maybe some sort of secondary authorship that over time will become a very important thing. And obviously right now, nothing like that exists, and so how much credit academic institutions would eventually give to that type of an authorship on a study that was based off of using someone else's data, I think is unclear, and I think that's an important thing to figure out, because if you talk to there are a lot of people I talk to at Northwestern who are involved in clinical trials, and it takes a lot of time and effort to get a data set in a usable format. And it also takes a lot of money, and they don't have, like you said, a lot of incentives to do that. So people are looking into doing that and giving them some sort of some sort of ability to be recognized on the paper is what some people have discussed. As far as what the journals are willing to do, we actually had Dr. Drazen, or Jeff Drazen, came and gave a grand rounds at Northwestern, and he's the editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, and he was talking about what type of studies that they're going to be willing to publish from reproduction analyses. And I think it may be difficult to get a complete reproduction analysis published, but a lot of this data is going to be useful in creating secondary analyses or using data that exists to answer brand new questions. And I think it'll be less difficult to get those studies published. But one of the things that he said that was very interesting is because there's a big push for this data becoming publicly available, one of the things that they had considered as a journal doing is any study that is submitted to them that uses someone else's data or data from a study that had published results, the authors of this secondary analysis are going to have to show that they were able to recreate the original study's findings to show that they actually have a knowledge of the data set that they were using and that they could work through the data well enough to recreate what the original authors had found, or if they couldn't, why did they think they couldn't do it, before they were able to submit their publication for publication in the New England Journal, which I thought was very interesting. It is. It certainly wasn't policy yet, but it was something that was being tossed around by some of the editors at the different journals.
All right. Thank you very much, Hawkins.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. Andrea Twist-Brooks is going to provide the closing remarks.
First, I want to thank all of you for coming today and contributing to this very stimulating program that we had. First, to our speakers, thank you so much for your presentations. I think we got a lot of things to think about, a lot of things to mull over, and to all the participants for your great questions and commentary. As I sat here today thinking I was going to have to make a couple remarks at the end, I thought about the title of our symposium, Open Data, Science, Health, and Community, and I decided to flip it around. I thought that we heard a whole lot about community today, and that was something that that we maybe had thought about in one way as we were putting the program together, but I heard brought up over and over again, communities, different levels of communities, global communities, our states, city communities, local neighborhood communities, and in addition to that, things like communities of practice, communities of volunteers, all kinds of groups of people coming together to create open data, to use open data, and to develop some new insights from the open data. The other theme I heard throughout the day was that of culture. So there's needs to change some cultures, to evolve cultures, to use the cultures that are there and acknowledge them, that they may have a different way of looking at data, a different way of developing tools for it, and that's something that we probably need to think more openly about, not necessarily making those very enthusiastic, maybe amateurs, volunteers, toe the line and do things our way, but rather turn them loose on the open data and let them do things their way and see what they come up with. I was very taken by the one remark about, the smartest people don't work for your organization. So the idea of bringing together all kinds of people to work on these projects and not necessarily looking inward for a lot of our inspiration, but looking outward and bringing new people into the fold and making sure we have the smartest people. I also, I'm not sure this was brought out entirely specifically, but another theme I heard in various places was the idea of getting them while they're young, or getting new people into the process, and not necessarily, we want to honor the fact that there are people with a lot of previous knowledge, a lot of experience, but I do think we need to start thinking about how we include those that maybe don't have as much experience but have enthusiasm, have creativity, have new ideas to bring to the problems and the issues that we want to look at. I did also, sorry, just a second, I got to turn this over. There are some other, and you'll notice everything that I've been talking about so far has been C's. I've got a whole theme of C's going here, so we're going to riff on C's for a while. Communication. Communication seems to be a critical piece of having open data initiatives and projects work, that we need to communicate with others and learn how to communicate about different issues. Collecting data is another one. There's a lot of open data out there. There could be a lot more. There's a lot of closed data sets, and so that's something that I think we need to sort of turn our creative consciousness to. And then I think there was some, finally, I won't go on too much longer, but there was the idea of credit, and that came up. I'm glad that came up last. I had jotted it down earlier, but how do you give credit to people, because they may do this for the love of it, but at some point, even if it's just a public acknowledgement of the work they're doing, even if they don't get paid for it or they don't get promoted for it, they need some kind of credit for the kind of work that they are doing. But I found the whole day just very inspiring, very interesting. One thing I also want to say is another C that came out that many of you probably weren't in, I know that you weren't involved in, was we did do a citizen science workshop yesterday with some of our students here as part of this whole workshop event. And so that's another C that was a very interesting one to think about, and it ties into that sort of volunteer ethos that many of our young people have, and so how do we tap into that as well? So again, I want to take this opportunity to please put your hands together and thank all of these wonderful speakers for today. And before you all scatter to the four winds, I want to tell you that you will be receiving an email with an evaluation of the event, and I hope you will take the time to fill it out. We promise it's not 40 pages, and it should be relatively painless to do, and we'd really appreciate the feedback on the event. So unless there are any last-minute questions or comments, I will dismiss you. Thank you very much.